the United States unsurprisingly emerged as the undisputed leader in scientific research and technological innovation. After all, most scientific and technological advancements typically occur in open and diverse environments, in a free and prosperous society capable of attracting and retaining the best talent. The confluence of conditions resulted in some of the most groundbreaking scientific discoveries, technological innovations, and propelled the United States economically through the second half of the 20th century. However, as America creeps closer to the mid-21st century, the landscape of global research and development has shifted. Some countries look to challenge and potentially surpass the United States economically, technologically, and militarily, with no regard on how to get there. The past 20 years has seen US competitors exploit America's openness through espionage and intellectual property theft, often forcing their citizens to be accomplices. Over the same time period, the number of Americans pursuing STEM field degrees has decreased, which means the United States continues to have to look abroad for an ever-increasing demand of scientists and engineers. But the United States is no longer the sole attractive destination for top-tier talent and must compete with other nations for the best and the brightest minds. In an era where technological superiority translates to economic prosperity, military capacity, and national security, the United States cannot afford to lose its place as the world's leader in research and development. The US must take strategic actions to sustain a vibrant and robust R&D ecosystem lasting generations. And it must do so in a balanced way, safeguarding our secrets while staying true to our values as an open society. First and foremost, the United States must remain committed to the open and collaborative nature and values of scientific inquiry and research, rather than resort to protectionism. Values like trust, transparency, and academic freedom are the foundation of fast advancement and innovation. Federally funded research programs at universities and national laboratories have done well by reinforcing the tenets of President Reagan's 1985 National Security Decision Directive 189, which ensures full access to information, free collaboration, access to user facilities, and exchange of personnel. Continuing to do so will encourage our allies and like-minded partners to collaborate and innovate with the United States for mutual benefit, rather than being slowed by unilateral protection mechanisms. Legally binding agreements to establish global norms and standards for international collaboration in the spirit of NSDD 189 can again unleash the power of open collaborations. Frameworks modeled after initiatives like the Budapest Open Access Initiative would allow vetted nations fast-tracked access to the research of participating member nations, fostering a secure yet open environment for innovation. Only non-member nations would be subject to more stringent review processes and have limited access to data, personnel, and facilities, encouraging nations to open themselves up to the vetting process and become participant nations. An international pre-check system for scientific collaboration, similar to an airport pre-check lane, amongst participating nations would enjoy streamlined approval processes for joint research projects, shared data, and talent exchanges, further incentivizing countries to adopt the principles, values, and norms of open research. It would also relieve US research institutions from administrative burden to check and to vet, and redirect valuable resources towards R&D again. While committed to principles of open research, the US should continue to develop robust measures to safeguard pre-publication results, prevent unauthorized use of research, and uphold ethical standards in scientific inquiry. America must also cultivate homegrown STEM talent while continuing to develop international researchers, expanding the Fulbright US Student Program, a government-funded international exchange program, will increase opportunities and mutual understanding between the United States and other countries through educational and cultural exchange, as well as create clearer pathways for talented foreign researchers to build careers in America. A next-generation GI Bill type program can bring talent into the STEM field that never thought about going there. Federal investment in cutting-edge research infrastructure ensures that America's scientific facilities remain the best in the world, able to adapt to changing technological needs, whether in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology, or other emerging scientific fields. In today's interconnected world, scientific leadership cannot be achieved in isolation. By implementing these measures, the United States can create a dynamic ecosystem that safeguards its innovative edge and foster groundbreaking discoveries with the potential to benefit all mankind.
Despite many reasons to be optimistic about the future of our environment, a recent study reports that 75% of young adults find the future frightening due to climate concerns. 45% of that same group reported that climate anxiety negatively impacts their day-to-day lives. Where does this pervasive pessimism about our environment come from? In fact, the United States and other countries have made great strides when it comes to air pollution, water quality, biodiversity, and even climate mortality. Since the 1960s, sulfur dioxide emissions in the US dropped from 30 million tons to 2 million tons annually. The percentage of rivers considered too polluted to fish improved from 40% to 15%. Endangered species like bald eagles and gray wolves have made remarkable comebacks. Even the California condor has returned to the skies after nearly a century-long absence. And globally, climate-related deaths resulting from hurricanes, floods, and other disasters have declined over the past 100 years. So why the disconnect? Why do we see such widespread environmental pessimism in the face of measurable progress? The answer may lie in how environmental information is communicated. A troubling pattern has emerged over the past 30 years. Environmental science research papers consistently use more subjective language than non-environmental papers. This subjectivity manifests in three specific ways: through personal feelings or biased language, using words like alarming; through unclear metrics, using words like massive; and through normative policy prescriptions with phrases like urgent action is needed. My ongoing research suggests this tendency towards subjectivity is rewarded. Articles using more subjective language receive more citations than articles that don't. The boost from doubling subjective language is equivalent to the boost from doubling a researcher's experience. In other words, subjectivity appears to be worth as much as the scientist's experience in his or her field. This suggests that environmental science is operating within a system that rewards language linked to emotion, to advocacy, and to activism, as much as it rewards experience conducting science. Such a system can erode public trust in science and ultimately can lead to misguided policies. In today's world, researchers often face pressure from journals, media, and even financial backers to emphasize punchy and dramatic narratives over objective analysis. Even the academic publish or perish model can encourage advocacy that might be subtle, imperceptible, or unintentional to the scientists using subjective language. A new technology may offer a way out. My research team is developing machine learning tools that detect and measure subjective language in scientific papers. These tools could help journal editors maintain higher standards of objectivity and allow for systematic auditing of scientific communication. Scientific objectivity is vital for effective policymaking, especially if we are to learn the best ways to promote a healthy environment. When science, the communication of it, becomes conflated with advocacy, the chance that well-meaning policymakers make decisions based on emotion instead of evidence increases. The stakes are high because environmental policies can cost trillions and have legacies spanning generations. Objective analysis helps us recognize and competently address problems like air pollution that pessimists of previous generations thought were intractable. We need similar clarity to rightly tackle new and emotionally charged environmental concerns in the 21st century. If we don't prioritize objectivity, we risk misallocation of resources by overemphasizing certain problems while overlooking others. We risk further eroding public trust in scientific institutions. That would make it harder to use discipline and prudence when prioritizing and addressing environmental challenges. We also risk a self-reinforcing cycle where pessimism drives alarmist communication, which in turn breeds more pessimism. The path forward requires a return to fundamental scientific principles. Science advances through the disciplined focus on proposing falsifiable claims that can be tested and potentially rejected, not through subjective statements that can never be proven or disproven. The good news is that large language models can be used to identify and promote objectivity in scientific communication. This tool could help ensure environmental policy is guided by evidence rather than emotion, leading to better outcomes and a more optimistic outlook for our planet.
When Xi Jinping launched the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013, there were mixed reactions in the United States and throughout the West. Some viewed it as a straightforward global infrastructure program. Others saw it as little more than grandiose propaganda. Within a few years, however, many became concerned that it was part of a larger effort to expand Chinese geopolitical influence through a Sino-centric global trade network, and by loading emerging economies with burdensome debt. Today, the Belt and Road Initiative has emerged as a founding pillar of China and Xi Jinping's long-term strategy to reshape the world order, one dominated by Chinese notions of state-determined political rights, economic development, and common security. Through China's Belt and Road Initiative, Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, and Global Civilization Initiative, Beijing hopes to diminish Western values in international bodies, dissolve the United States' network of alliances, knock the US dollar off its pedestal, and eliminate Washington's technological edge. In a 2023 speech, Xi himself proclaimed that China was already leading the way to reform the international system with the help of these four initiatives. Despite such statements and China's initiatives, many American officials have dismissed the writing on the wall, especially after some of China's progress, including diplomatic efforts, have failed or backfired in recent years. U.S. leaders and policymakers cannot assume these setbacks are indicative of a permanent downward trend. Instead, America must recognize Beijing's initiatives and efforts are comprehensive in nature, well-resourced, global, and most importantly, strategically designed to support Xi's long-term vision. To succeed against this vision, the United States must offer its own vision for the international community, one that paints America, not China, as the agent for positive change. America must also learn from China's playbook to fully understand what the U.S. is up against diplomatically, economically, and even militarily. Diplomatically, China has been more engaged and more heavily invested on the global stage than the United States. China has more embassies and representative offices than any other country. Its diplomats speak frequently at conferences and publish streams of articles to promote their vision. All of this is further supported by its wide-reaching state media networks like CGTN. China relentlessly portrays itself as a welcome agent of anti-colonial and anti-imperial change, while painting the United States as the defender of an unpopular and imperial status quo. In one recent academic study, even though international audiences initially preferred American values and principles, exposure to effective Chinese messaging shifted their views. Economically, although Belt and Road financing has dropped sharply since 2016, the initiative still encompasses over 100 countries, and China is on the cusp of leading the world's deployment of green technologies and digital infrastructure. Xi Jinping has also leveraged Russia's invasion of Ukraine as an opportunity to push de-dollarization of the global economy, hoping to advance the use of its own and others' currencies. China has also expanded its military reach, establishing its first military logistics base in Djibouti, with plans for an additional 10 bases and support facilities. In Africa, China brought over 100 senior military officials from nearly 50 African nations to its China-Africa Peace and Security Forum, agreeing to hold joint military exercises. And China's foreign ministry reports over 100 countries, regional organizations, and international organizations support China's global security initiative. All of this threatens to undermine, or at least challenge, the military alliances developed by the United States and its security partners. The alternative vision that China offers resonates with many non-Western nations. Xi's enticing sales pitch capitalizes on other nations' strong desire for national sovereignty and a greater voice in global affairs. If successful, Beijing's efforts could fundamentally alter global governance and replace universal values with state-determined rights, transparent institutions with opaque ones, and rule of law with rule by decree. Success for the United States means that Washington cannot simply play defense and support the status quo. It must articulate its own unique and positive vision for change, one that preserves what's worth keeping, core democratic values, open markets, and free enterprise, yet still reforms and transforms in meaningful ways. New relationships must be built. Emerging and middle-income economies deserve a seat at the table and a voice in decision-making. Existing partnerships must be strengthened. Bolstering diplomatic ties, deepening economic partnerships, and recommitting to security frameworks will be crucial to dampen China's appeal. Last but not least, the United States must demonstrably prove through its own actions that open, free, and democratic societies provide the best pathway to a better and more prosperous future than any alternative.
If there is one lesson America should learn from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it's that deterrence would have been a lot cheaper than war. Deterrence served the United States well during most of the Cold War, but in recent years, the United States and other democracies seem to have gotten worse at it. Deterrence is an act of psychology, to persuade your adversary to desist or delay their plans for war by demonstrating that you and your allies have the capabilities and the resolve to effectively resist their use of force. It's about persuading your adversary that war will be far more costly than they should like to bear. As China's paramount leader Xi Jinping intensifies his calls for unifying Taiwan with mainland China, even by force, it might be easy to dismiss those calls as idle threats that don't require more than cosmetic changes in our deterrence posture. After all, Chinese leaders have been making threats for decades. But unlike China's late leader Deng Xiaoping, who said China could wait 1,000 years for unification, Xi Jinping has said the issue can no longer be passed from one generation to another. He has called for the United States to break from decades of policy and publicly support Chinese unification. In a speech to the 19th Party Congress, Xi Jinping praised Mao Zedong's surprise attack on U.S. forces in Korea, signaling his readiness to go to war under what he seems to believe are similar circumstances. Most concerning of all, he has steadily intensified military activity around Taiwan over the past few years, launching missiles over the island and demonstrating the ability to impose a blockade. His Ministry of Defense recently said that Taiwan's leaders now have, quote, a sword hanging over their heads. The ministry further vowed that pressure will only increase like a ratchet, and that China's military actions, quote, will be pushed forward until the Taiwan issue is completely resolved. American leaders and policymakers can no longer afford to dismiss these sentiments as posturing. The United States must step up and do everything within its power to deter a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan and thwart Xi's ambitions head on. Failure to do so would be devastating to American power, security, and prosperity. Taiwan is rated as the most democratic state in Asia and the 8th most fully democratic state in the world, ahead of the United States. If Beijing coercively annexed Taiwan, it would extinguish the hopes of millions of Chinese people for a more liberal form of government at home. It would also undermine faith in U.S. credibility as an ally, leading many people in Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, and Australia to argue it would be better, as Hoover Senior Fellow Larry Diamond put it, to surf the wave of China's rising hegemony rather than to be drowned by it. Finally, it would undermine U.S. technological and economic dominance. Taiwan is the world's leading producer of the most advanced silicon chips that power smartphones, medical devices, defense weapons systems, and artificial intelligence. Were China to gain control of Taiwan's chip factories intact or even damaged, Beijing could either gain near monopolistic power over this crucial technology or cause supply chain disruptions that would compromise America's military and technological edge. All of this, however, is avoidable so long as the United States, its allies, Japan and Australia, and Taiwan itself take appropriate action now. These nations must first make military deterrence their explicit and primary goal. Diplomacy and economic sanctions can help, but won't work in the absence of credible hard power and a stated resolve to use it. The U.S. should maintain investment in legacy systems, especially submarines and long-range bombers, even as it builds futuristic autonomous weapons. Adequate munitions stockpiles, anti-ship missiles, and loitering drones can threaten to turn the Taiwan Strait into a boiling moat, inhospitable to China's Navy. The U.S. must also work more tightly with its allies in Taiwan to conduct realistic training exercises to defeat an attempted blockade or invasion. Fortunately, we don't need to match China ship for ship or plane for plane. In amphibious warfare, geography heavily favors the defender. Moderately higher investments in asymmetric weapons can offset China's massive investments in ships and planes and ballistic missiles, making the cost of invasion unbearably high for Xi Jinping. Preventing war through strength is far less costly than fighting one through necessity. The United States must prepare for deterrence now or risk catastrophic conflict later. Taiwan's destiny, with its continental and regional global implications for democracy, national sovereignty, and prosperity, depend on it.
In 1823, during his annual address to Congress, President James Monroe warned European powers not to meddle in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere. Simultaneously, President Monroe emphasized that the United States should avoid European entanglements and prioritize its own hemisphere. What became known as the Monroe Doctrine, the cornerstone of American foreign policy for much of the 19th and 20th century, is neither a call to isolationism nor a call for imperialism. The Monroe Doctrine serves instead as a reminder that, to paraphrase Secretary of State George Shultz, American foreign policy begins in our own backyard, our own neighborhood. Today, though, this strategic outlook has been ignored, forgotten, and even worse, abandoned. The United States finds itself locked in a new era of great power competition. We face no shortage of geopolitical challenges. Strategic rivals like China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran represent serious, coordinated threats to the United States, its allies, and global stability. Now, it's necessary for the United States to dedicate time and resources to addressing those threats throughout the world, but doing so at the expense of America's own neighbors and neighborhood is a grave mistake. If the United States is to successfully face its challenges and confront its rivals, it must rededicate itself to the strategic orientation of the Monroe Doctrine. America must put the Americas first. The United States must prioritize diplomatic relationships, military alliances, and economic partnerships with its neighbors in the Western Hemisphere. President Ronald Reagan understood the Western Hemisphere's strategic importance in his fight against the Soviet Union. To effectively wage the Cold War, Reagan forged strong relationships and partnerships in the region. He engaged in high-profile diplomacy by making trips to Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Honduras. And he hosted key Latin American leaders at the White House. He developed economic initiatives like the Caribbean Basin Initiative and he laid the groundwork for NAFTA. He encouraged transitions to civilian rule in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay, and he rolled back the spread of communism with calculated covert action. Such a comprehensive strategy, however, is missing in today's world of great power competition. While the United States has paid little attention to Latin America in recent years, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have made significant economic and political inroads. China has partnered with 22 countries in the Western Hemisphere, investing in infrastructure projects and increasing trade by nearly 3,000%. While economic cooperation has allowed the Chinese Communist Party to gain footholds across many Latin American countries, the Chinese Communist Party also exports advanced surveillance technology to authoritarian regimes in Venezuela and Cuba. And the Chinese Communist Party now provides drug cartels with not only the chemicals and equipment needed to manufacture narcotics, but also the money laundering services to wash their profits. Russia, meanwhile, is strengthening its regional ties, particularly with Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Moscow has also flexed its anti-American, anti-Western influence through its economic partnership with Brazil, a founding member of BRICS, which purchases Russian diesel fuel to fund Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine, circumventing Western economic sanctions. Hezbollah, Iran's terrorist proxy, deals arms, launders money, among other illicit activities in South America, funneling millions to the Middle East to finance terrorism. North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un continues to foster relationships with Brazil and Cuba and has recently permitted the opening of a brand new Nicaraguan embassy. Now, despite the despotic quartet's regional advancements, most Latin American countries still view the United States in a positive light. The National Intelligence Estimate for Latin America finds that the region would be most open to U.S. engagement on shared interests including education, economic investments, and renewable energy. Following Colombia's admission in 2017, Argentina's President Javier Milei has applied for global partner status with NATO, and in May 2024, Argentina and the United States held joint naval exercises for the first time in 14 years. The United States must advance these encouraging developments. America must dispense with non-binding status quo forums dedicated to pledges and declaration under President Joe Biden's America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity. Instead, America must seek binding and sustainable long-term economic cooperation that leads to regional integration, joint security measures that address 21st century challenges, and cultural exchanges that strengthen our hemispheric relations. In fact, we should engage in what George Shultz referred to as gardening. We should tend and cultivate diplomatic relations with our neighbors through constant, proactive engagement. The President should visit our neighbors more often and tend to the garden. The United States must actively engage its neighbors to ensure long-term prosperity and stability. Like Ronald Reagan, policymakers must again align national power with grand strategic purpose. And it starts in the neighborhood.
America's presidential history is a tale of generational shifts, with each cohort leaving its mark on the nation's trajectory. Our first two presidents, Washington and Adams, and a majority of the signers of the Declaration of Independence were all from the Liberty generation that guided the Republic through its arguably most vulnerable and formative years. Fast forward to the Lost generation, born between 1883 and 1900. This generation steered America through World War II, the Great Depression, and the early years of the Cold War. They, in turn, passed the baton to the greatest generation, born between 1908 and 1924. JFK, LBJ, Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Bush 41 navigating America through the end of the Cold War, presiding over significant civil rights advancements, and even putting a man on the moon. The greatest generation's 32-year reign from 1961 to 1993 seemed a fitting capstone to their contributions. However, as we near the end of the 2024 election, we face an unprecedented scenario. Historically, generational leadership lasts around 30 years before the next generation comes of age and steps into the highest seat in government. But not so today. The baby boomers, born between 1946 and 1964, have almost exclusively occupied the Oval Office since 1993 and threatened to extend their hold on the presidency into a fourth decade. Since Bill Clinton's inauguration, the boomers' tenure has already surpassed previous generational cycles, and the 2024 election offers no respite. Both major candidates are boomers, ensuring this generation's grip on power will extend for at least another 4 years. The extended boomer dominance in the White House raises critical questions about generational accountability, as well as the present and future challenges facing our nation. For it's under the boomers' leadership that several concerning trends have emerged or worsened, putting America in a precarious position. First, and perhaps most concerning and consequential, is our mounting national debt. Neil Ferguson, a historian and Hoover Senior Fellow, has authored what he calls Ferguson's Law, that any great power which spends more on interest payments towards the national debt than it does on defense will not stay great for very long. The Habsburg monarchy, the Ottoman Empire, even the British Empire all suffered this fate. Under the boomers' reign, the national debt has ballooned from $4 trillion in 1993 to $35 trillion in 2024 and growing. Ferguson's Law will be put to the test this year as the Congressional Budget Office has stated that debt interest will be 3.1% of America's GDP and defense spending only 3.0%. Then there's entitlement reform. Longer life expectancy, higher health care costs, and lack of political will to reform entitlement programs have made Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid unsustainable for future generations and looking at bankruptcy unless elected leaders stop playing political football. Lastly, the United States under the boomer generation has decidedly mixed foreign policy results. While there have been success stories, such as confronting the scourges of AIDS and malaria in Africa, failures in Somalia and Rwanda, the rise of ISIS, the seemingly forever wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the inability to thwart Putin's ambitions, and escalating tensions with China all plague this generation's record. The question is, can the next boomer president break from these patterns and address these issues which their generation has either created or exacerbated? To tackle this dilemma, how about a boomer debate? Whether it's the two boomer candidates or candidates from newer generations in future elections, the long-term consequences of boomer policies are coming home to roost, and they must be debated openly and in the least partisan way before the damage is irreversible. Most importantly, the idea of generational accountability needs to take root in the American psyche. While we talk about age limits for politicians, we must also consider the consequences when one generation remains in power too long and may no longer represent the majority of the country, its people, their interests, their perspectives, or their values. It is imperative that Americans demand more from their boomer candidates to ensure that the extended boomer presidency becomes a period of reflection and correction, not delegation and procrastination. The next president, regardless of party, must commit to addressing the shortcomings of their generation's legacy in order to chart a course towards a more fiscally responsible, globally engaged, and enduring America. Okay, boomers?
Are you scared of AI? Are you excited about AI? Or maybe a little bit of both? AI has the potential to make day-to-day life easier and more convenient than ever before. And it has the potential to take control of systems, to be weaponized in ways that could create catastrophic destruction. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 were a scale event, killing 3,000 people and costing $50 billion in their immediate wake. The catastrophic risks associated with AI, especially weaponized AI, could go far beyond the scale of 9/11. So, How can we prevent, or at least mitigate, the risks of a weaponized biological, chemical, or cybernetic AI? What can we do to prevent a loss of control over an AI system whose power and kinds of intelligence might exceed our own in some ways? And how do we do that while still encouraging the rapid development of artificial intelligence that could help our whole society? Well, the first step both policymakers and industry leaders must take is they need to agree on how to think about AI. Right now, on the one hand, we have the doomers who see only risks and nightmares. On the other hand, there are bloomers who only see through rose-colored glasses. It becomes another culture war. One side anxious about change, the other side exalting innovation. New and transformative technologies, like nuclear power, often need to find a middle ground between utopian and dystopian futures. Those with public responsibility have to recognize how little we currently know, how much we have yet to discover. They have to acknowledge that there's risk, but they have to find a way to pursue innovation. So the best path forward, then, is likely to go forward while managing risks. After all, if we don't fully understand AI's potential, it's next to impossible to have effective oversight. And there is a precedent that's already on the books without a big new law. We already have laws about product liability. But producers facing potentially huge liability risks will need safe harbors that can help them and show them the way to advance. And government can help with that if it will work with the innovators. Let me introduce another idea to you. We do need to explore the dangers, but with careful controls. We explore the dangers to learn how to counter them. The best counter to bad AI will probably be good AI. We also must explore ways to use AI as a counter to any nation, like Iran, Russia, or North Korea, or any individual for that matter, looking to weaponize artificial intelligence against us. Just as dangerous pathogens are studied in secure biolabs and conventional weapons tested safely on proving grounds, advanced defense work can allow engineers and scientists to assess the greatest dangers posed by the worst people. But that means we have to be able to conduct the most dangerous AI research safely to know how to counter it. As we study and learn more, independent AI safety institutes and organizations can help serve as trusted intermediaries. These safety institutes stand between both government and the private sector with insight into both working with the companies but informing government. They can potentially foster innovation, help proliferate the technology, and inform government so it doesn't have to stifle innovation with overregulation in pursuit of control. To move forward wisely, the United States must forge and maintain strong relationships with the private sector where the dynamism is going on. And it also has to build lasting public-private partnerships so that the United States and its friends can remain ahead of our competitors. Doing so will protect ourselves against the risk AI poses, but it also allows AI to flourish in the ways that can improve our society, increase our prosperity and our economic mobility, and give us the brightest future we can have.
Public universities generally can't punish students based on what the students say. That's true even if the student's speech is deeply offensive to many. Public universities are branches of the government, and thus bound by the First Amendment. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that public universities can only restrict speech based on its content in a handful of narrow, traditionally recognized exceptions. Classic examples of such unprotected speech are true threats of illegal conduct, intentional incitement to imminent and likely lawless action, and face-to-face targeted personal insults that are likely to start a fight. There is no exception for supposed hate speech, or even for advocacy of genocide. Students are free to call for the destruction of Israel, or for an even more forceful response by Israel in Gaza. If Iran detonates a nuclear bomb in Israel, students will be free to call for Israel to do the same to Iran, even if that means killing a vast number of Iranians. Likewise, in a future China-Taiwan conflict or some other foreign war. War and the mass killing it brings are regrettable facts of international affairs, and all Americans, students or not, have the equal right to defend and criticize acts of war. Private universities aren't bound by the First Amendment as such, because the First Amendment only applies to government actors. But many private universities have voluntarily adopted policies committing themselves to follow First Amendment principles. The private Yale University might not want to be seen as providing less protection than the public University of Connecticut. Indeed, California even has a state statute extending First Amendment protections to private university students. So, in practice, most private universities respect student free speech rights in much the same way as public institutions. The temptation to censor speech we hate is strong and understandable, but it's also dangerous. If we support censoring speech that offends us, eventually the views we support will be censored too. The best way of dealing with evil ideas is to argue against them, not to suppress them. Such counter-speech isn't a perfect solution, but it's better than the alternatives. To be sure, many universities have given in to the temptation to restrict speech in recent years, suppressing speech that some claim was racist or anti-gay or anti-trans or what have you. And part of human nature is what I call censorship envy. Once speech that offends one group is blocked, other groups will seek similar restrictions on speech that offends them. After all, who wants to be the chump who goes along with free speech principles when others are getting away with suppressing speech that they dislike? The solution to this sort of inconsistency, though, is to return to equal freedom of speech, not to level down towards equal suppression. But even public universities can impose content-neutral restrictions on the time, place, and manner of speech. They can, for instance, ban demonstrations that are unduly loud, or that block entrances to buildings. They can ban destroying campus property, physically assaulting invited speakers or fellow students, or occupying offices. Likewise, universities can forbid students from camping out in public spaces. Public spaces are supposed to be open to all students, not to some small group that chooses to take them over for its own purposes. But all such rules must be evenly applied based on what is being done, not what is being said. The same rules should apply whether it's a conservative group, a liberal group, or anyone else. Indeed, if a public university applies such rules in a content-based way, that itself would violate the First Amendment. Any restrictions that we support will soon be used by officials with whom we sharply disagree. Content-neutral restrictions that apply equally to everyone may make sense, whoever is applying them. But the power to suppress student speech based on its message is a dangerous power, one we shouldn't give to university officials any more than to other officials.
American democracy is in crisis. Political polarization and institutional distrust threaten the fabric of our republic. Some claim the United States is in an inevitable decline. But are we? Is it inevitable? Our constitutional republic has survived crises, civil war, societal unrest, and economic turmoil for nearly 3 centuries, while other states have been short-lived and collapsed into tyranny. Understanding the conditions from which democracy is born and thrives can determine whether our current crisis will lead to a decline and inform what corrections must be made to ensure American democracy continues to flourish. Global peace, prosperity, and liberty depend on it. Asked in 1787, at the end of the Constitutional Convention, what kind of government the United States will have, Benjamin Franklin famously replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." These words were laden with responsibility. Experiments in self-governance like those of ancient Rome and Athens were rare and asked much of citizens. Benjamin Franklin understood that and recognized our republic demands constant effort to keep it alive and to preserve our liberty and rights. Democracy demands much from us as citizens because unlike autocracies, there's no boss but ourselves. Citizens govern with one another, not over one another. Consequently, this relationship between citizens survives only through civic bargaining. Kings and oligarchs dictate laws and prescribe cultural norms with little need to negotiate or bargain with their subjects. Constant compromise and negotiation are, however, integral to democracy. Yet only when certain necessary conditions pertain can civic bargaining take place, from which democracy can emerge. First, no boss. Citizens must accept the responsibility of governing themselves directly or through accountable representatives. States must ensure lawful and peaceful conditions, and the people must have ample opportunity to secure basic means of living. Collective self-governance by a citizenry must clearly define who is a citizen and who is not. Citizenship brings with it rights, but also duties. Being too inclusive can dilute the value of being a citizen. Being too exclusive can create resentment. The institutions of decision-making and conflict resolution must be well designed so they can be run by and accountable to the members of the democracy. The survival of democracy depends on citizens' ability to engage in good faith compromise. The creation and preservation of a common good must take precedence over unilateral demands for perfection. To negotiate in good faith, citizens must be able to see one another not as political enemies, but as civic friends, engaged in a shared enterprise, interested in finding common ground. And lastly, perpetuation of these conditions relies on civic education. Cultural values, institutional knowledge, and political and societal history must be passed down to future generations to take ownership in self-governance. These conditions, while necessary for democracy to emerge, must be robustly sustained for it to flourish. When these conditions break down, democracies face decline. When they are abandoned, democracies fail. There is a growing sense, however, that many of these conditions are weakening, but that should serve as a call to action rather than resignation. The United States has endured through many external and internal crises, and our Constitution was deliberately constructed to self-correct by restoring these conditions. At the conclusion of the Constitutional Convention, not everyone signed on. It was an imperfect document that did not answer every question or solve every issue. The institution of slavery, the most glaring among them. But Benjamin Franklin understood it was the best we could achieve at that moment, and a document that could evolve over time to address its imperfections. Quote, "I consent because I am not sure that this Constitution is not the best. The opinions I have had of its errors, I sacrifice to the public good." Franklin's message to the convention was one that emphasized sacrificing demands for perfection to achieve a common good, trusting that the Constitution was a framework for ongoing civic bargaining, and that issues like slavery, although unsettled, would eventually be resolved. The United States faces no shortage of challenges, but decline is only inevitable if we choose it. American democracy can still flourish through individual civic action, a recommitment to civic education, and the willingness to bargain with our fellow citizens so that we may continue to drive cultural, political, and legal change and enable peaceful transfers of power. The United States, with all its imperfections, has brought more liberty and prosperity to more people than the founders could have imagined. With courageous and thoughtful civic action from many individuals, with diverse interests, but a commitment to a common good, America will continue to thrive and shine as an example to the world.
In the aftermath of the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, freedom and democracy were on the rise, and communism was largely discredited. But in recent years, communism and its utopian dreams have regained popularity, particularly among Western youth who have never seen or experienced the brutal reality of its regimes. What then can be done to restore the truth about communism? What can be done to educate the younger generation about the inherently tyrannical and ruinous nature of the communist ideology? An ideology responsible for the worldwide deaths of over 100 million people, deaths by executions, government-induced famines, and forced labor camps. Throughout its history, the Hoover Institution has endeavored to record the truth about this deadly ideology. In my new book, Documenting Communism, I tell the story of a project undertaken in the 1990s to save the history of Soviet communism. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, the new Russian government opened the Soviet archives for the very first time. This created an opportunity to copy millions of previously secret files on Soviet communism and to illuminate its terrible consequences, including the unnecessary deaths of 20 million of its own people. As deputy director of the Hoover Institution at that time, I recognized this as a chance to realize a central mission of the Hoover Institution and its founder, Herbert Hoover. That mission has been to document dangerous ideologies like communism and its like-minded cousin, socialism, and in the process help promote peace, liberty, and prosperity for all. After connecting with Rudolf Pikoya, the newly appointed head of the Soviet archives, I proposed a collaborative project to copy and publish these newly opened archives. We sought to make them available to everyone without restriction and provide a better understanding of what really happened behind the Iron Curtain. During this 12-year project, we microfilmed over 10 million pages of previously unseen documents. For the first time, the complete history of the Soviet Union could finally be told. It could no longer be ignored, falsified, or effectively defended. It was all now a matter of record. The political workings of the Communist Party, the ruthless actions of the NKVD, Stalin's state police, the operations of the Gulag, the system of forced labor camps, and countless Soviet crimes, including the Katyn Forest massacre of Polish officers during World War II, the downing of Korean Airlines Flight 007, and the cover-up of the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. All these and much more have been brought out into the light. The project faced staunch pushback in Russia, and surprisingly at home among some in the United States. Still suspicious of the West and opposed to sharing their archives with foreigners, many Russians, especially in the media, accused Mikoya of exploiting his own history and selling out his country. Critics in the United States mistakenly saw the project as an attempt to monopolize access to the Soviet archives and to use financial incentives to secure them. Despite this opposition, we persevered and eventually prevailed. Strong support from the Hoover Institution and its donors enable us to make our project a reality. The numerous benefits of this project continue even today. Hundreds of scholars have come to the Hoover Archives to use the collection. They've published dozens of scholarly works based on them. Two examples stand out. The Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Gulag, by Anne Applebaum, chronicles the history of the forced labor camps, what she has called the quintessential expression of the Soviet system. The other is Stephen Kotkin's definitive biography of Joseph Stalin, one of the world's most deadly tyrants. In addition to this scholarship, the project set an example of cooperation between once hostile nations. Despite cultural differences and logistical challenges spanning 3 continents, the desire to seek and deliver truth, however uncomfortable, successfully united both sides. The work undertaken by the Hoover Institution is as valuable as ever. Communism and its utopian promises continue to attract those who have never experienced its brutality, especially our youth. For those willing to learn, this collection of Soviet archives exposes communism for what it really is, a system that delivers only the opposite of what it promises. We at Hoover hope my book will be a source of inspiration to those who stand against threats to liberty and who support Hoover's continuing efforts to document and expose them for all to see.
The modern school reform movement began 40 years ago with the release of the landmark report, A Nation at Risk. This urgent call to action described a crisis in American education and made recommendations to improve student achievement. In the decades since, federal, state, and local leaders have pursued countless reforms aimed at boosting outcomes. But what actually worked? And what lessons can guide education policy today? The Hoover Education Success Initiative brought together 12 exceptional scholars to analyze the reform record of the last 40 years in our own report, which was called A Nation at Risk Plus 40. The goal was to document attempted changes in areas like standards, assessment, governance, and more, and then analyze the available evidence on each reform's impact. Taken together, the series gives an unprecedented view of reform efforts over time, revealing both bright spots and blind spots. The sheer volume of reforms pursued is striking. Billions of dollars were invested to adjust parts small and large across a mostly unchanged system. About half focused their improving efforts on inputs, like teacher quality or learning materials. These had limited effect unless implemented deeply and over time. Process reforms like accountability policies were harder to assess, but they showed promise when sustained and coherent. Output reforms directly targeting metrics like test scores did boost student learning initially. Graduation rates rose, and achievement gaps narrowed, but many gains have reversed in recent years. Finally, outcome reforms set external quality bars for credentials and for student readiness. Though aspirations have grown, judging real progress requires applying uncompromising standards. A staggering array of treatments, interventions, redesigns, and innovations that our authors identified makes it a challenge to rationalize our collective experience into any semblance of order. Despite the cacophony, the catalog of activity amassed by our authors supports a few observations about our 40-year effort to reform that hold potential for illuminating future directions for elementary and secondary education in our country. First, most reforms were rushed out broadly without considering local fit or interactions with any other changes already underway. Second, the sheer volume of incremental, incoherent additions led to reform fatigue without meaningful improvement. Third, impatience for instant success ignored realistic timelines. Fourth, the system's resilience suggests reform attempts actually strengthened the status quo structures over time. And fifth, stagnant outcomes show a tolerance across the country for lackluster results. In effect, the report card on 40 years of education reform reads impulsive, incremental, incoherent, impatient, intransigent, and ineffective. This does not mean nothing worked. A few interventions, when implemented deeply, did improve student learning, but many more came and went, while the system's core remained untouched. Where does this leave policymakers seeking to help students emerge strong from our pandemic? Our research suggests a few guideposts. Ground education reforms in local context rather than imposing one-size-fits-all solutions. Commit to depth of implementation over breadth, and stay the course over years, not months. Align components into coherent strategies, engage synergies, not isolated efforts. Anchor designs in realistic timeframes and sustain support for the long haul. Study implementation and refine as needed. And uncompromisingly assess impact to ensure reforms deliver their intended benefits to students. American education faces no shortage of challenges. The one thing we may have conclusively proven is that the system, as presently constituted, has been resilient to reforms at scale. What is clear is that we have a thin collection of reforms that have been shown to work and that can scale. Instead, we have an impressive record of what not to do. We can't assume that ideas that have been proven effective in one setting will be effective in every setting. We can't expect changes at the margin, no matter how well they are done, to be able to leverage an entire school model. Our children deserve schools that enable them to achieve their full potential. If we learn from experience and hold fast to what works, better outcomes surely wait within reach. The time for thoughtful, sustained, and evidence-based improvement is now.
Remote work has exploded since the pandemic struck. Most employees like working from home at least some of the time. But this big shift in how we work and live is highly uneven across jobs and people. Frontline staff who earn modest paychecks rarely get to enjoy the benefits of working from home. Instead, they commute every workday to engage customers and coworkers, operate machinery, and look after facilities. In contrast, highly paid professionals and managers often work from home 2 or 3 days a week, saving time, money, and aggravation, and enjoying more personal autonomy and more time with family. That's the new work from home divide. In order to better track and understand this development, my co-authors and I built a large language model to read and classify job ads. We started by sampling 10,000 online job ads. We had real people read each one and flag the ads that say the job lets the employee work from home 1 or more days per week. Next, we used the results to train a language model to replicate the human readings. As it turns out, our language model replicates human judgments 99% of the time. Finally, we applied our language model to classify the work-from-home status of hundreds of millions of job ads over the past decade, and millions more ads each month. That yields monthly statistics on work-from-home opportunities by occupation, industry, city, and more. Let's look at how remote work opportunities vary with pay. Our data show that jobs with low pay, around $30,000 per year, very rarely offer the option to work remotely. As we move up the pay scale, work-from-home opportunities become more common. About 10% of new jobs that pay $60,000 per year offer remote work options. It's 20% for new jobs that pay $100,000, and more than 30% for new jobs that pay at least $200,000 per year. Not only that, the link between higher pay and remote work opportunities is much stronger today than before the pandemic. There's also a clear connection to education. Jobs requiring only a high school diploma very rarely provide remote work options. But nearly 30% of jobs that require a postgraduate degree allow for hybrid or fully remote work arrangements. Work-from-home opportunities also rise with experience levels. Only 3% of job ads that require less than 1 year of experience offer remote work. That makes sense, because entry-level workers typically need more training, oversight, and mentoring. In contrast, more than 1/4 of jobs requiring 7+ years of experience offer work-from-home options. The more seasoned you are, the more likely that you can be effective when working remotely. Finally, there's a clear remote work divide between part-time and full-time employees. Only 3% of ads for part-time jobs offer remote work options. In light of these big differences in work-from-home opportunities, what should managers do? For starters, they should openly acknowledge that a divide exists so that employees feel heard. To avoid perceptions of unfairness, it helps to align the working arrangements of managers with those of the employees that they supervise. It's also worth considering options like a 4-day work week for staff that must work on site. Survey data reveal that many employees prefer to work 10 hours a day at 4 days a week rather than 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And managers should also consider one-time pay adjustments to compensate employees who miss out on the benefits of working from home. The data make it clear. The opportunity to work remotely differs greatly by type of job, pay level, education, and experience. This new divide will endure because remote work has proved practical and beneficial in many jobs and tasks. Since the remote work divide is here to stay, managers must grapple with the resulting tensions. If they don't, they may lose some of their best employees and experience a loss of morale and camaraderie among those who stay.
Election laws, from voter identification and felon disenfranchisement to automatic registration and no-excuse mail voting, are depicted by partisans in the media as having massive consequences on who votes and ultimately who wins elections. Many people express dismay about laws they disagree with, arguing the laws have dire consequences for American democracy. Some claim that laws allow voter fraud to swing elections in one way, while others claim that votes are suppressed to swing elections the other way. Listening to candidates, pundits, and partisans, it would be easy to conclude that election laws are ground zero for heated partisan battles, with the United States' status as a democracy at stake. But research I co-authored with my colleague Eitan Hirsch suggests that the heated rhetoric around election laws just doesn't match the evidence. In our study, we looked at the actual effects of policies like voter identification laws, election day registration, and early voting on election outcomes. We found these laws have negligible impacts on who wins elections. This may seem surprising given how fiercely the two parties fight over voting rules in legislative debates and court battles. Democrats often accuse Republican-backed policies like voter ID of suppressing turnout of Democratic voters. Republicans claim Democratic proposals like mail-in voting invite fraud that benefits the other side. Both parties imply the stakes are high whenever voting rules change. And yet, our research shows that partisan stakes are actually very low. That's because most voting laws only target a small fraction of voters, barely affect turnout rates, or tend to evenly target Democrats and Republicans. Take voter identification laws, which require voters to show approved photo identification at the polls. Critics charge these laws deter Democratic-leaning groups like minorities from voting. Yet studies have consistently found that voter identification laws tend to have no effect on overall turnout, and even a minuscule effect on turnout for individuals who lack identification. Because the laws have such a small effect on turnout, it just isn't possible that they could swing many votes to either party. And as a result, voter ID laws simply can't swing all but the very closest of elections. It's a similar story with other high-profile voting policies we analyzed. Expanding mail-in voting might raise turnout just slightly, but that increased turnout doesn't tend to benefit either party. Other laws have small effects that sometimes benefit Democrats and sometimes benefit Republicans. For example, we find that giving felons the right to vote benefits Democrats in some states and Republicans in others. We provide a mathematical framework to explain our results. Let me give you an example. In a state with an electorate split 51-49 Democrats to Republicans, let's suppose a new law is implemented that imposes additional requirements to vote. Let's also suppose that these new requirements only affect 4% of the electorate, and among this group, turnout drops 3 percentage points. And finally, let's suppose that those who are deterred from voting are disproportionately Democratic voters. So 60% of those deterred from voting are Democrats, while 40% are Republicans. What would happen to the outcome of the elections after implementing this law? Well, the policy would cause a 0.12 percentage point decline in overall turnout. That's barely an eighth of a percentage point. And the vote for the Democratic candidate would fall by 0.011 percentage points. In other words, if the state had 1 million eligible voters, the policy would deter 720 Democratic voters and 480 Republican voters, netting the Republicans a 240 vote shift. In reality, few voting laws even come close to depressing turnout among those targeted by even 1 percentage point, let alone 3 percentage points. And those laws rarely target just one party's base so precisely. Factoring in these realities, our study shows most voting rules barely make a dent in actual election results. This explains why academic studies like ours consistently find negligible partisan impacts from reforms like mail voting, voter ID, and same-day registration. Now, some claim parties and campaigns counter-mobilize against voting restrictions, masking their true effect. But my co-author and I show counter-mobilization is far too limited in scope to explain the null results found across dozens of studies. The bottom line from our research is clear. The partisan stakes of most voting laws are far lower than the overheated political rhetoric suggests. This doesn't mean election rules are unimportant, but it does explain why the partisan outcomes rarely match the doomsday prophecies of political parties and pundits. So next time you hear politicians or talking heads on TV insisting otherwise, remember the empirical evidence. Voting laws can raise valid concerns about equality, ethics, and implementation, but their partisan impacts are marginal. The data are clear, even when the rhetoric isn't.